Hello, everyone. I've got with us today Janis Bowdler, and she's the president of the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, one of the most important people in the whole world of corporate social responsibility. You don't want to miss this episode.
Welcome to Your Mark on the World, bringing you another changemaker with champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
This episode is made possible via the support of our sponsors, including Johnson & Johnson's Caring Crowd. Janis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's exciting to be talking to you. I'm just giddy with excitement here as we talk. JPMorgan Chase, largest U.S. bank, is it the largest bank in the world? I mean, we're talking about a big bank, right?
Yes, largest bank in the country.
And trillions in assets.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big deal. And so as the president of the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, give us a sense of the scope of responsibility that you have.
Sure. Well, the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, annually, we are giving close to $250 million a year to promote inclusive growth in 40 countries around the world. I'm very excited to share with you that earlier this year, we announced that we're actually increasing that commitment to the communities where we live and work. So that's 40% increase. That'll get us to close to $350 million a year, with the goal of over the next 5 years putting out $1.75 billion.
Wow. You're talking about grant making of $1.75 billion a year.
That's right.
That is an incredible scale. Now, how do you invest the money that sits in the foundation?
Sure. So we have 4 areas that we focus our work. How are we training people for jobs for the future, taking into account all the ways in which the nature of work is changing. We're looking at how we're supporting small businesses in their growth and the growth of ecosystems that support entrepreneurs. We're looking at the financial health of individuals and families. And we're looking at the places where people grow up and a challenge around disinvested communities and how we can help create greater economic opportunity where people live.
Well, those are great mission areas, So are you grant making in those areas and investing in those areas?
So right now our work is predominantly around grant making, but I think it's important to share that these 4 areas that we've identified really started as a transformation about 5 or 6 years ago, where the leadership of this company took a step back and said, how can we be really strategic with our philanthropy? Not just spread dollars around to a number of different organizations and causes, but how can we line up against areas where we think we can have a real impact, which means not just our grant dollars, but how are we leveraging our intellectual capital? How are we leveraging our business, the data that we have, and all these resources that we can bring to the table when we're working in communities. So my role is certainly to think about our charitable giving, but we're thinking much more broadly than just that. And I can give you a lot of examples of how that comes together in the community.
Let's talk about an example or two.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, I think one of the things that people immediately think about has been our signature commitment to the city of Detroit, right? The story is well known, a city sort of on its heels, at the cusp of bankruptcy. I'm sure I don't have to tell the full story of Detroit to your listeners. And it really came from a conversation that Jamie Dimon was having with Lee Saunders and some folks in the labor community about what more can a company like JPMorgan Chase, with all the resources that we have, how can we help? Well, that was a pretty interesting question. So Jamie turned to the team and said, go find out how we can help. And the story here is interesting, so I hope you'll indulge me for a moment, because it wasn't clear at this moment. So this is back in 2013. It wasn't clear exactly how we could help. So we went to the city, a team of us, a couple dozen people, and started meeting with everybody in the city, their philanthropic leaders, their business leaders, public sector officials, nonprofits, advocates, and said, what can we do? And we found quite a bit of cohesion amongst all of those organizations. And they said, actually, the 4 areas where you're focusing can be a tremendous help. Let's go deep in those areas. And we crafted a $100 million initiative, committed $100 million over 5 years to the city. We actually ended up meeting that commitment 2 years ahead of a schedule and increased our commitment to $150 million. Along of that original 100 million, 40 million of that was in the form of low-cost loans, 60 million was in grants. But in addition, we've also sent teams of our employees through what we call the Service Corps, where we take top talent out of revenue-generating seats and we send them to work for a nonprofit for 3 weeks at a time to work on a project. And we've now, for the last several years, been sending a couple of teams in per year to really bolster that nonprofit infrastructure. So again, we've also used our data from the JPMorgan Chase Institute to support the work of the nonprofits on the ground. So we've been lining up all of these things in the city of Detroit. And I don't want to make it sound like everything's all roses. There are a number of challenges still facing the city, but we're starting to turn a corner in the city. And I think if anybody who's been to Detroit in the last year or two can feel this renewed energy, the downtown has made a strong comeback. There's a nearly 0% vacancy rate in Midtown. I mean, you can't get an apartment there. So we've now expanded our focus out to the neighborhoods, understanding that while parts of the city are making a comeback, there are still big swaths of the city that have yet to feel that turnaround. But it's demonstrated for us that when we line up these investments and we're locking arms with the community on the ground, that we can make a real difference.
Now, you are still relatively young, relatively early in your career. You started, am I remembering right, in Cleveland?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So you've made quite a transition from the community work you were doing in Cleveland to working in Washington, D.C., to now I'm presuming you're based in New York. How on earth did that all come about?
Sure. And I currently live in DC, but any given day you're just as likely to find me in New York. So sometimes it feels like I live there. So how did it all come about? It's a great story, actually, and one I could not have predicted for myself. So I'm a native to Northeast Ohio. I grew up just outside of Cleveland in a small town called Ashtabula, Ohio, where from a very early age, the principle of geography of opportunity was really impressed upon me. Of course, I would not have used those words in high school, but this idea that zip code matters, zip code being a major determinant of life outcomes, and that really artificial boundaries, right, determine where you go to school, what sort of access to work you might have. So that made a huge impression upon me. And as I made my way to the community development sector in Cleveland, I saw that reinforced again. I worked in Cleveland's Huff and Glenville neighborhoods on a project that was a redevelopment corridor that was trying to connect the predominantly low-income African-American neighborhoods of Cleveland's East Side with the very affluent, culturally rich neighborhoods of University Circle, where you have the Cleveland Orchestra and Case Western Reserve and a number of other cultural institutions. And you could just see, even though it was a matter of a couple of blocks, the life experiences of those two communities being very different. So I took that work then, ready to make a change in the world, and headed to DC, really wanting to work on federal policy, and found my dream job at Unidos US. At the time, it was called National Council of La Raza, where I started out working on housing policy and working in Latino communities across the country. Eventually I was overseeing all of the economic policy work, and there there came this moment where I got approached by the JPMorgan Chase folks, and I'm very honest when people ask me about this. At first I thought, probably had the reaction that a lot of people thought I might, like, oh no, I'm not sure if this is really for me, right? And I sat down with the leadership here and got inspired quickly about the vision from the top, from Peter Scher, from Jamie Dimon, really laying out wanting to do something very different from a corporate philanthropy perspective, right? And now our mantra internally has become more than a check. We're more than a check. We're not just spreading dollars out, but we're trying to have real impact. So yes, more than one head turned after I had spent about 15 years in the nonprofit sector, 10 years specifically on national civil rights. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that in relatively short order, I think we've really been able to change people's perspective about what's possible in a corporate partner, and how can we, again, work alongside communities, again, doing deep listening and crafting solutions that meet them where they are.
How does your past life inform your current work?
It's everything. I mean, I firmly believe that representation matters. So sitting in this seat, I'm bringing both my lived experience as well as my years of professional experience of understanding the racial wealth divide, understanding some of the structural barriers that exist for people to be able to move up the economic ladder. And so that translates into our work every day. We have a North Star around driving inclusive growth in our communities. But behind that, we understand that we have to bring an equity perspective to this work, because if we're just helping growth by itself, and I think we could say that we're seeing unprecedented global prosperity, but clearly we're leaving large swaths of our communities behind, and that's fomenting. We're seeing a lot of political unrest. I think you can tie probably to several issues, but this is a major factor, right, in terms of the concerns that we see bubbling up. So having a specific equity lens to this work and thinking deeply about what it takes to bring communities that have historically been left out, whether that's communities of color, whether that's specific neighborhoods. We're also in particularly around the gender wealth divide, or in the small business sense, right? Like, however we define this, we have to have intentional strategies to bring people to the table. And that's something that's been my life work to date.
But clearly, JPMorgan Chase, the bank, isn't a charity, even if the JPMorgan Chase Foundation is. How do you use your platform at the foundation to influence the policies and practices at the bank to make it more charitable, and as it continues to execute on a profit mission?
Sure. Well, I think this is one of the great stories that we have to tell, is the very symbiotic relationship we have with our colleagues in the line of business. And I think first it's important to say, if my leadership were here, if Jamie Dimon were here, he would certainly brag about all the philanthropy that we do, but also point out that we are in fact business led, and that our business is achieving a lot of good on the ground, and our philanthropy is able to come in behind and reinforce and expand that work. But more and more, what we're learning in terms of how we can support low-income consumers, how we're helping entrepreneurs of color, is feeding itself, sort of feeding a virtuous cycle even within the firm. So I actually, I'm going to be a bit coy with you here, maybe an attempt to get you to invite me back to the show. We have a couple of interesting initiatives that are currently in the kitchen that really draw a direct connection from the work that we've been doing in the community to new policy ideas within the firm, but they're not quite ready for prime time.
Great. Well, we look forward to sharing them with our audience, Janis, that's for sure. Janis, you had an amazing career. You've done so much, and the future is so incredibly bright for you going forward. But what is the most important lesson you've learned during your career?
Oh man, now the one question that maybe wasn't prepared for. I think this is going to hit every cliche I think that's out there, but very early on in my career, one of my mentors advised just to follow passions and to live your values, and the doors would open up for you. And I don't want to make it sound as though it's an easy or magical path, but that's been what drives me in all of the work that I do. And I think I like to think that when I sit down with people, they can feel both the principled positions that I'm bringing to the table, the passion I have for these issues, but that they're also very much rooted in our shared values. And not only has that helped guide my career, but I think it's allowed me to sit across the table from a lot of different kinds of people in this job, in my past job, whether I share their political views or not. And that has meant I've been able to be a very effective communicator, an effective coalition builder, and ultimately move an agenda around economic mobility and opportunity forward.
You talked a little bit about as a youth, you saw the impact of a zip code.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to understand, though, from that experience is why you felt compelled to do something about that personally.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you might have made that observation and decided that you needed a personal strategy to rise above it and move on. There were probably a few kids in your high school that did that,
Mm-hmm.
figured out the same problem you did and moved on and found a strategy to compensate. You felt responsible to solve the problem,
Mm-hmm.
and then have devoted years, decades to that effort. Why?
I think it's easy to look at my own story and think about how I beat the odds, and we love nothing more than a beat the odds story. But at its core, what we really believe as Americans and what we say we value is the American dream. It's really a set of systems in which people, no matter where they're born or the circumstances of their birth, are able to rise, to get into the middle class. Not everybody expects to hit the lottery and be wealthy, but they expect to be able to live with financial security and dignity and to share whatever assets they might have with their children. This has always struck me as fundamentally like we have a disconnect here. This is what we believe, but in fact, many of our systems to promote that have broken down. Whether they, for some people, never worked very well at all, or for others, we've just seen a fraying in that, in those systems in the last 10 or 15 years. So yeah, that sits deep inside me where I can't let that go. And I think I have something to give to a movement around building economic opportunity. And I think it's core to who we are as Americans. Like we love a comeback story. We love the come from behind, but actually I think when we all sit down across the table from one another, we believe that there should be a fair system in which everybody has a shot to live up to their economic potential.
Oh, that's a great answer, Janis. Now, you've done so much. Everyone wants to know, what is your superpower?
What is my superpower? Am I allowed to phone a friend on that one? No, look, I mean, I've been really fortunate to have a number of great mentors in my life that coach me. I'm really fortunate in particular, I would say any young people out there who are thinking about how they manage their careers. Identifying a supportive partner is really important. And in my case, I have a young family. I have a very supportive husband who champions the work that I do. I also have taken the time really, I think, to invest in myself. And so I think I think this combination of things of like building out your network, making sure that you've got some good champions in the corner, making sure that you're incorporating your family into your work life. This is part of the balance that we're all trying to achieve, and it's a very real thing. Those are just some of the things that it takes. I would love to say that there's a superpower, that there was a wand in the back pocket, but there's really not. Most of us, I think, who are leading in a big way, it's often a day-to-day job, right? Especially thinking about anybody else who might be listening and they've got young families. I feel you. It can be quite a challenge, but I think for me, being able to show my daughter that this is what I do every day, being an example for her, but also trying to, improve the world that she's going to inherit is incredibly important to me.
Oh, that's great. Well, Janis, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know we didn't cover nearly the story of JPMorgan Chase Foundation, and there's so much more to tell. I hope we can have you back. But before you go, maybe you could just take a 1 minute and tell people how they can learn more about JPMorgan Chase Foundation and perhaps connect with you personally.
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. So anybody can Google my profile, Janis Bowdler, on LinkedIn, and follow me or stay up to speed with what the JPMorgan Chase Foundation is doing. And of course, folks can go to the corporate responsibility page of JPMorgan Chase. They can follow us also at Chase on Twitter and on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, again, Janis, thank you so much for being with us today, and we wish you every success in helping to create greater equity in America.
Thank you so much, Devin. Thanks for having me.
All righty. Let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is available at youtube.com/Devin Thorpe. Subscribe to this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes by searching for Your Mark on the World. Every weekday, Devin hosts a CEO, celebrity, entrepreneur, or other changemaker here on the Your Mark on the World show to inspire and prepare you to make your mark. Devin is a champion of social good, writing about, advocating for, and advising people who are doing good. He is a Forbes contributor who is a recognized thought leader in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and crowdfunding. To book Devin as a speaker, visit devinthorpe.com.